In this lesson are introduction, weather, climate, adaptation to climate, polar regions and tropical rainforests. So, weather, climate, these are the terms which are very commonly used by us in our day-to-day life, right? Many times we say that, the weather today is very pleasant. Cool breeze is blowing and, neither very sunny nor very, wet or moist weather. Sometimes it is raining heavily. So we say that, oh, it's a rainy day. So you don't feel like going out. Sometimes during summers, it is so tiring. It is so hot outside. It's like scorching heat everywhere. Whatever you do, you feel tired easily. You get a lot of sweat. So you have so much of discomfort. So what are these we are talking about? Sometimes it is a sunny day, sometimes it's a rainy day, and again we are not comfortable traveling on a rainy day. Sometimes you have storms and winds, and these kind of heavy storms and winds, they also cause a lot of discomfort to human beings, plants, as well as other animals. In fact, sometimes the wind is so terrible that it can actually cause huge loss of property. So it can also cause huge loss of plants. So many plants get uprooted, the small plants which are not strong enough to bear that storm. So they get uprooted. So much of excess of loss also takes place due to these kind of storms. So not only that, so when we are talking about excess of any kind of weather, whether it is excess heat, excess rain, excess wind, so do you refer that as a good weather? Not really. We say that the weather is bad, the weather is horrible when it is excess of anything. And what do we call a pleasant weather? So when we say a pleasant weather, it's like a cool breeze, moderate temperature. So you are feeling comfortable, you are neither sweating nor are you like trembling out of cold, nor is it raining to make you feel uncomfortable. So when everything is just at the right amount, that is when we feel that okay, so the weather is kind of pleasant. Now I'm pretty sure that a lot of you might be wondering that climate and weather, even though these are two different terms, so when I say climate and I say weather, so they are like two different terms, yes, of course, but a lot of you might be thinking that more or less we use them in the same sense. A lot of times we say that, it's a bad climate today. A lot of times people say, oh, it's a bad weather today. But when you will learn this lesson, you'll get to know that weather and climate, they are two different things. They do not mean the same thing. So what is weather? What is climate? And how does it matter to us if the weather changes? And how do we, when I say we, it is not only about the human beings, it is about all living organisms. How do we adapt to the climate of the place where we live? Now, when it becomes extremely cold, what do? We start wearing the woolen clothes so that they can keep us warm. Similarly, when it starts raining, what do? We start using raincoats, umbrellas so that they can protect us from rain. So, we also need to adapt ourselves in order to survive in adverse climatic conditions. So, in this lesson, we are not only going to learn what is weather and what is climate, but we are also going to see how do we measure what kind of weather it is. Like I'm saying that okay, it's raining heavily. Now when I say heavily, how much rain means heavy rain? How much rain means mild rainfall? So we are going to talk about climate and weather in detail, and then before concluding the lesson, we are also going to see how different living organisms adjust themselves, adapt themselves to survive in different types of places with different climatic conditions. Now, when I talk about weather, climate, these kind of things, let me give you some common scenarios where you actually experience what are we talking about. For example, have you ever seen the news? So if you listen to the news on your television, even if you don't, that's a good habit. So you should start seeing the news on TV. So you get a lot of information about what's happening in the world. And there you also have a section where the news reader tells you about the weather forecasts. So she tells you what would be the weather in different places in the coming days. So different places do not have similar weather. So different places have different types of weather. For example, sometimes in the news they say that it is likely to rain in Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu is located towards the southern part of India. But at the same time, sometimes you have a news like some rain and snowfall over high reaches of Jammu and Kashmir. So it might be raining in Jammu and Kashmir, which is at the northernmost part of India. So at the same time, it might not rain in Tamil Nadu, or it might be a very dry weather in places like Goa or Karnataka or Maharashtra. So as you look at different locations, the climate of that place changes. So in some places it is sunny, in some places it is cloudy, somewhere it is raining. So, the weather changes. So that's what, now how does this lady or the news reader, how does she know that how the weather is going to be in the coming days in different places? So she is just giving you the news, but actually it is all calculated scientifically by the meteorological department. So there are people who have good knowledge about weather forecasting, and there are instruments to measure and to predict how the weather would be in the coming days. So that's how this entire news comes up. So in case you have never seen the weather forecast on your television, please have a look at it. So you will understand it better, So when you are learning something, when you actually do what it is, like if you actually go and yourself watch on your TV, you'll say that you will feel better. You'll feel as if you're exploring something new. So that's the weather forecast on a TV. If not television, just try to check your newspaper. So in most of the newspapers, you will see that there is a column somewhere towards the top. Now it changes from the way it is appearing here in this newspaper, might change in different newspapers, but at the top you will see it will talk about the temperature of the particular city and how the weather is going to be the next 1 or 2 days. So whether it is going to rain or not, what was the maximum temperature throughout the day, what would be the minimum temperature throughout the day. Because see, even in one complete day, early morning the temperature is lower, right? We feel cold early morning. But again, by the time it is afternoon, it's like very sunny and hot, we start feeling hot. So the temperature increases. And again, as the sun sets, as it is evening and the night, again the temperature starts dropping. So basically in one day itself you have different temperatures. Sometimes the temperature is less, sometimes the temperature is more. So for every day there is a minimum temperature and the maximum temperature. So when you know that range, so you can actually know that okay, how the temperature is going to be throughout the day. So that section is always there in every day's newspaper. So that's again a place where you see, just for example, here you see Bangalore today is 30 degrees Celsius. That means today's temperature is 30 degrees. And if you look at the maximum and the minimum temperature, so the minimum temperature is going to be 21 and the maximum is going to be 32. So this gives you an idea about the climate of your place for that particular day. In fact, if you try to look at a weather forecast in little more detail, sometimes these kind of forecasts also come on your newspapers. So for example, I just picked up this one from today's newspaper. So it was the forecast for various cities. So you see here Delhi. The temperature in Delhi is 15.7 degrees Celsius, but the temperature in Kolkata is 28 degrees Celsius. Again, as you're coming down in Mumbai, it is more. Hyderabad, it is even more. So you see, different places do not have the same temperature. So when you look at the northern part of India, in Delhi, the temperature is very less. So people in Delhi might be feeling quite cold, whereas people in Hyderabad or Chennai, they might not be feeling cold, they might be feeling hot. So this temperature actually tells you about the weather of that particular place. And for every city, here in this table you see it gives the maximum and the minimum temperature for that particular day. For example, this forecast is for a particular day, which is Monday. So on Monday, all these places, for example, Ahmedabad will have a maximum temperature of 27 and a minimum temperature of 10. Similarly, if you see Jaipur, it will have a maximum temperature of 23 and a minimum of 5.8. So for every place, the maximum and minimum temperature is given, and also the average temperature for that particular day is being given. So these are the places where you actually come across some weather reports. So you can consider them as reports because they are telling you the weather of a particular place. So in this lesson, we are going to see what actually is this weather, what causes weather to change, because you see with different location, weather is changing. Again, in the same place also, with time, the weather changes. So we will learn all about weather here. See, what exactly is weather? How do we define weather? So weather is the state of atmosphere at a location on a daily basis. This is very important. Now, till now I have been telling you that weather and climate are two very confusing terms, because a lot of times we think that both mean the same thing or both are synonyms, but that is not the case. That's because whenever we talk about weather, we actually talk about the conditions of the atmosphere of a particular day. So if you are talking about the kind of atmosphere which we have today, so we say that the weather today is good or the weather today is not good. So whenever you are talking about a particular day, it is what you are talking about is weather. Now, different locations can have different weather conditions. For example, it might be snowing in Jammu and Kashmir on a particular day, whereas it might be dry on the same day in Kerala. So weather changes from day to day basis. It is not necessary that if today you have a very cloudy weather, tomorrow also you will have similar type of weather. It might be sunny tomorrow. So now the question is, how do we determine how is the weather? How do we say that whether if the weather is good or bad? So for that purpose, there are few elements of weather. So when we talk about weather, we are basically talking about a few things. So those things are termed as the elements of weather. So these elements are temperature. So if the temperature of the atmosphere is very high, then we will feel hot. So we say that the weather is hot today. If the temperature is very low, again we will say that it is very cold today. So whether the day is hot or cold, that is determined by temperature. Next is rainfall. So rainfall is another very important element of weather. So if it rains heavily, we say again it's a rainy day, the weather is bad. If it doesn't rain, in that case also the weather becomes dry. So how much amount of rainfall is there, that also determines the weather of the particular day. The third element of weather is humidity. Now you see, what is humidity? First of all, humidity is nothing but the amount of moisture present in the air. So what is this moisture? Have you ever felt that after heavy rainfall, sometimes the environment becomes very humid? I mean, you feel sweaty kind of thing on your skin. So what is this? This is nothing but presence of moisture or water either in the form of liquid, that is liquid droplets, or in the form of water vapor in the atmosphere. Now water vapor cannot be seen because it is very small molecules of water. So we cannot see them with naked eye. Now, it has been observed that warm water can hold more water vapor than cold air. So, therefore, when the air is warm, the moisture content of the air is more. And therefore, when humidity is more, we feel the air is wet. So, humidity is all about moisture in the air. So you can actually feel the wet air, and that is when we say that the weather is humid. And generally the weather is humid after rainfall because there is a lot of moisture in the environment. So that is when you can actually feel humidity. Next is wind speed. So how is wind speed an element of weather? So have you ever seen storms and extremely high winds blowing at certain times, especially during a thunderstorm just before rainfall? You would have seen these kind of winds blowing. So that also impacts the weather. So when it is very windy, so do you feel comfortable? Let's suppose you are walking on the street and suddenly a huge thunderstorm comes in. I mean, it's like taking you away. So the wind is that high speed. So will that make you feel comfortable? Not really. So because this wind speed is also an element of weather, so it is also a change in the atmosphere which can affect you. So wind speed is another important element. Clouds. What are clouds? Clouds are collection of tiny water droplets or tiny ice crystals. So these water droplets, they get accumulated in the atmosphere, and then when you actually have too much of accumulation of these water droplets, they fall as what we call as rainfall, and that is called precipitation. So these droplets are very small and light, and that is why they float in the air and they form clouds. So actually clouds are nothing but tiny, very tiny water droplets. And presence of clouds make the weather cloudy. So sometimes it's a cloudy day, and generally cloud is followed by rainfall. That's because gradually the water droplets are accumulating, and when too much of accumulation happens, they fall as rain. So these are some of the important elements of weather. So when we want to define the weather for a particular day, we should talk about the temperature, rainfall, humidity, wind speed and clouds for that particular day. Now, what causes change in weather? Because we have seen that the weather changes from day to day, on day-to-day basis. So today's weather and tomorrow's weather are different. So what brings about this change in weather? So weather can even change over short periods of time, because the term weather is only applicable for the atmospheric conditions of a particular day. Now again, the next day the clouds might disappear, the next day it might rain heavily, the next day might be sunny. So it can change over very short periods of time. In fact, not only days, sometimes it also happens that during the morning the temperature is more. Not sometimes, in fact all the days you would have seen that the afternoons are hotter than mornings or nights. Correct? Because there is a change in temperature even within couple of hours. Similarly, sometimes it rains in the evening, but the mornings are like quite sunny. So again, that is a change in weather even within a couple of hours. So this tells you that how weather can change even within a few hours. Morning 6 o'clock, it was like quite bright and sunny. By afternoon 3, it became almost cloudy and it started raining as well. So that's how weather changes. It changes over very short periods. Now, when we talk about change in weather, so we also want to see what causes the change of seasons. Now, have you noticed that the weather changes during different seasons? The summer seasons, it's like the temperature is very high, you feel hot, it's heat everywhere, less rainfall. So that's how summer seasons are. When you compare it with the winter season, where not too much of heat, you do not feel hot, instead you feel cold. Rainfall, again, it's not really necessary that there will be too much of rainfall, but the temperature changes drastically. So there are many different seasons. So for example, if you talk about the spring season, in India we have spring season somewhere around March to May. Spring season, which is followed by the summer season, when you have, when the temperature is quite high. Now this summer season again is followed by the monsoon, when you have too much of rainfall. So a lot of rainfall, and again this also lasts for 2 to 3 months from July to September. This monsoon in turn is followed by the autumn season, and autumn is the season when there is a lot of leaves falling off the trees. So that's the autumn season, and it comes just before winter arrives. And finally you have the winter season, when the temperature is very low, you feel cold, you wear sweaters and jackets to keep yourself safe. So that's the winter season. So in all these different seasons, you see one or the other element of weather changes. For example, if you talk about a specific element of weather, say temperature. So temperature during spring season would be moderate. During summer, it would be high. During autumn, again, it would be kind of moderate. During monsoon, the temperature might be low because there is a lot of rainfall and sometimes it cools the environment, and during winter the temperature is very low. So you see, any particular element of weather shows variations during different seasons. If you talk about rainfall, so rainfall will be maximum during monsoon, but there might be no rainfall during summer season. So each of the elements of weather, whether you talk about rainfall or temperature or pressure or clouds, so all of these changes in different seasons, elements in little more detail. So we will first talk about temperature. Now, how do we measure the temperature of the environment? Like we are saying that, okay, when it is summer, the temperature is more, and when it is winter, the temperature is less. Similarly, we said that during the early morning, the temperature is low. That's why we feel cold. But by the time it is afternoon, it's like quite hot, and the temperature becomes high. Now, how do we know how much is the temperature? So for that purpose, we have this device called maximum and minimum thermometers. So these are special type of thermometers which have been designed to measure the temperature of the environment. Like we are all familiar with a thermometer. We know what is a thermometer. So it's like a glass tube which has mercury inside it, and it has a scale which is graduated with various values, and when we put it in our body, it tells the temperature of our body. So that thermometer is a clinical thermometer. We have learned about thermometers in one of our previous lesson, right? So we often use thermometer when we fall ill, when we are high with fever, we want to measure our body temperature. So this is also a thermometer which again consists of a glass tube with graduations on it which help you to note the temperature, but it is little differently designed so that it can measure the temperature of the atmosphere. So let us have a look at this special type of thermometer. So this is how maximum and minimum thermometer looks like. So you see, it has got two scales instead of one. Like for the normal thermometer which is used to measure body temperature, it just have one scale, but here you have two different scales. So it's like kind of a U-shaped tube. So the glass tube is U-shaped. So what does this thermometer do? What is the speciality of this thermometer? It is going to record the highest and the lowest temperature during a period of time. So let us say if you want to know what was the highest temperature on a particular day and what was the lowest temperature, so this thermometer would be your best choice. So that's what I was telling you, right, when I showed you the newspaper clippings. So in the newspaper clippings, it told the maximum and minimum temperature for each particular location. Like for Bangalore, it showed the maximum and minimum temperature. For Delhi, it showed maximum and minimum temperature, and similarly it showed it for all other places. So how we recorded that temperature is using a maximum and minimum thermometer. So let us learn more about maximum and minimum thermometers. So here you can see the picture more clearly that it has got a U-shaped glass tube. So if you see, this is the U-shaped glass tube. It is in the shape of the English alphabet U, right? So and in this U-shaped glass tube, on both the sides, you have two separate temperature scales along each arm of the U. So if this is your U, this is one temperature scale and this is another temperature scale. So one of these will measure the maximum temperature, the other one will measure the minimum temperature. And both these arms, so this is one arm, this is another arm, and both these arms, they terminate in a sealed glass tube. So on the other end, it is not open, but it is sealed on the other end. And which is the liquid present inside maximum and minimum thermometer? Like mostly in clinical thermometers, mercury is present because of so many characteristics, like it does not stick to the walls, it has very high melting point, it has a shiny appearance. Now in these thermometers, mercury is not used because there are certain disadvantages also which are associated with mercury, like it is very difficult to dispose of mercury because it is extremely poisonous. So in these thermometers, mercury is replaced by alcohol, because alcohol has a lot of properties which are similar to Mercury, but at the same time it doesn't have the disadvantages which are there for Mercury. So basically this is how the construction of the maximum and minimum thermometers are. So if you look at these two separate scales, so you can very clearly see that in one scale, so it is in the increasing order towards this side, whereas on the other scale it is just the opposite. The values are increasing along this side. So it is something like this. So here on this scale, the more the column moves up while measuring temperature, what would happen? And what would happen if it goes high on this scale? So if on this scale the value it is going up, the value is actually decreasing. But in this scale, if it is going up, the value is actually increasing. So that is the beauty of having two arms, and each arm has the labeling in the opposite sense. So two temperature scales exist. So this is one temperature scale, this is another temperature scale. So one records maximum temperature, whereas the other records minimum temperature. So you can have a close look on the maximum and minimum thermometer. So you see the terminal ends of the thermometer, they terminate in sealed glass bulbs, and also the two different scales, one of them is for maxima, the other one is for minima. So you see, as the liquid rises on this tube, it gives you the reading of minima, and the rise of liquid in this tube gives you the reading for maximum temperature. So that's how this thermometer measures maximum and minimum temperatures. So now the question is, what causes this variation in temperature? Why the temperature changes so frequently? I mean, even within one day, the temperature changes between morning and night. Again, the temperature changes between seasons. So what causes this change in temperature? So let's see, what is the cause behind this change of seasons? So let's take this scenario. This is the sun, and we all know that Earth is just one planet which revolves around the sun. In fact, all other planets also revolve around the sun in a particular orbit. So let's say this is our Earth, and this Earth is revolving around the sun in this orbit. So this line shows the orbit in which Earth is revolving around the sun. Now initially this was the position, so this was the initial position of the Earth. And now let us say after some time it comes to this position. So let's call it position number 2. So we are just considering these two positions to understand what can cause the temperature variation. Now whichever part of the Earth is just like a sphere. You can just consider it as a ball. So if there is a ball like this, so in this case what will happen? This part of the ball will receive more heat, it will receive more light, because heat and light is coming from the sun. Sun is the ultimate source of heat energy, light energy. So all the heat and light will be towards this side. So that means that this part of the sphere would have higher temperature when compared to this part of the sphere, because this part is receiving more intense heat, correct? But when this same Earth, when it is revolving and it finally reaches this position, what is happening? Whichever part is on this side, so that is going to receive more heat, more light. So this part is going to be hotter in this case. So basically, as the Earth revolves around the sun, the part of the sphere which is receiving more heat also changes. Now, one more important thing to be noted is that one thing is that Earth is revolving around the sun. At the same time, Earth is also rotating about its own axis. So this is the axis of the Earth, and it is also rotating about itself. So you can just imagine, as it rotates about itself and it is also revolving around the sun, so at every point of time only a particular part of the Earth is receiving the heat and light from the sun. So that part of the Earth is having a higher temperature when compared to the other part, and this change in orientation is happening periodically, because we know that Earth takes 24 hours to complete one rotation. So basically this is rotation, which is movement of the Earth about its own axis, and this rotation takes 24 hours to complete. And that is why we have this day and night thing. That is why one cycle of day and one cycle of night takes 24 hours. Again, the earth is revolving around the sun, and this is called revolution. And one revolution of earth around the sun takes 365 days, which is 1 year. So therefore, within 1 year, you have a lot of variations. You have so many different seasons. That's because when the earth is actually moving around the sun, at every point, a different part of the earth is receiving the heat and light from the sun. So that is why the variation in temperature happens as you start from January till December. So sometimes it will be hot, sometimes it will be winter, sometimes it will be rainy. So it will keep on changing. So the temperature variation basically happens due to the exposure of the earth or a part of the earth towards the sun. So the main thing which is responsible for various seasons which we have is revolution. And what causes day and night? So day and night is mainly because of rotation of the earth on its own axis. Now earth is rotating about its own axis. Now as it rotates, what happens? Now as it is rotating, only a particular part of the earth is receiving more heat from the sun as compared to the others. So due to this spinning of the earth, which takes 24 hours, so one spin, to complete one spin, it takes 24 hours. So during that one spin, different parts get heat at different point of time. So that is why during morning the temperature is like less, maybe because at that time the orientation of the earth is such that it is not receiving lot of heat from the sun. Again, during afternoon, it's like maybe it is in direct contact with the sun, and that's why it is receiving a lot of heat and light, and therefore the temperature is higher. So due to the rotation and revolution of the earth, the changes of temperature takes place. Weather, which is a very important element, and that is rainfall. Now we often talk of rainy days. We often our schools get shut down if it is raining very heavily. So what is this rainfall, and how do we measure how much rainfall is taking place at a particular place? So for measuring rainfall, we have something called as rain gauge. So this rain gauge helps to measure the amount of rainfall at a particular place. Now you would have learned it in your GK, that or general knowledge, that which place receives highest rainfall in India, and you would have learned it that Cherrapunji is the place. Now how do we know that which place receives more rainfall and which place receives less rainfall? So there has to be something which can measure it accurately, how much rain is happening at a particular place. So that is why this rain gauge has been designed. So here in this picture you can actually see how a rain gauge looks like. It looks like a cylindrical tube, right? One smaller cylinder inside a bigger cylinder. That is how it is appearing to me. So let us now try to see what is a rain gauge and how does it measure rain. So let us look at a bigger picture of a rain gauge. So there are three important parts in a rain gauge. So the first important part is a funnel. As you can see here, you have a funnel like structure here. So that funnel is one important part, because funnel is that part which actually helps to collect the rain. So that's the funnel. Inside you have a tube, that is the inner measuring tube. So that is the tube which actually measures the amount of rainfall. So therefore it is the measuring tube. And outside you have a cylindrical structure, right? So this one is the outer cylinder. So these are the three important parts of a rain gauge. Now how do we measure rain? Now when it rains, now this upper part is open. So that's how the funnel is going to collect the rainfall. So when it rains, the funnel will collect the rainfall, and then the rain will get collected in the inner cylinder. So you see, the funnel is actually linked to the inner measuring tube. So the rain will come into the inner measuring tube, and the inner measuring tube is actually graduated with values. So it can actually measure how much water is coming to this tube. Now this tube can measure up to 25 millimeter of rainfall. So 25 millimeter is nothing but the height of this tube. So the measurements which are mentioned there. Now the question is, let's suppose if it is raining very heavily, so the inner tube will get immediately filled up. So how are we going to measure the excess amount of rain that is coming in? So any excess amount of rain is captured in the outer cylinder, and that is why we have a bigger outer cylinder. So look at this picture, it is giving you a better view. So the inner cylinder is only up to this much, but the thickness of the outer cylinder is much more, so it can actually accommodate a lot of water. So all the excess water will get collected in this outer cylinder, and then how are we going to measure it? And then what we will do is, first we will measure the water that is there in the inner cylinder. We will pour the water outside, and we will again take the water from the outer cylinder and put it into the inner cylinder, and then again measure it. So using the inner cylinder's calibration, rainfall as low as 0.1 inch can also be measured. So their calibration is done in such a way that even a small amount of rainfall, even a few drops of rainfall can also be measured. So that's how we can decide where we are having less rainfall and where we are having more rainfall. So I'll quickly repeat the process how we actually measure it. So let us suppose it is raining very heavily. So what will happen when it is raining very heavily? So very soon the inner measuring tube will be full. So when it is full, so you already know what is the maximum capacity of the inner tube. So that is, let us say in this case, that is 25 millimeters. So 25 millimeter you have already measured. So now what you do, this 25 milliliter you take out from this tube and you just keep it somewhere else outside. You pour that water outside. So now you have this inner cylinder empty. Now all the excess water has been collected in the outer cylinder. So from outer cylinder you pour it into the inner cylinder and again you measure it. So let's say again it became completely full. So again you add 25 millimeter. Right? And now let us say whatever you put, it is maybe 2 or 3 millimeters. Okay, so you just write it 2 millimeter, and now you add this all up to get the rainfall or to measure the rainfall. So in fact this is how rainfall is measured. Now how do we determine whether this much rainfall is a less rainfall or heavy rainfall or moderate rainfall? So for that purpose we have decided a range. That okay, if the rainfall measured comes to be in this range, then it is moderate rainfall. If it comes in this range, then it is heavy rainfall. So what is that range? So any rainfall, so less rainfall or low rainfall or less rainfall would be less than 0.1 inch. So inch per hour. So that is because time plays a very important role. Maybe you just kept it like this for 10-12 hours. So obviously it will get filled up. So you have to specify a fixed time. Maybe in 1 hour, how much ever it will get filled, that will decide the measurement of rainfall. So if the amount of water collected is less than 0.1 inch in 1 hour, then we will say it has that location got low rainfall. What would be moderate rainfall? So moderate rainfall would be anything in the range of 0.10 to 0.30 inches per hour. So this would be the range for moderate rainfall. And when you talk about heavy rainfall, so heavy rainfall would be anything more than 0.30 inches per hour. So that would be heavy rainfall. So basically with rain gauge, rainfall amount is described as the depth of the water which is reaching the ground in inches. So we are actually trying to measure the depth of the water which is reaching inside this tube. So that's what we are trying to do. So this is how rainfall is measured, and that is, now you got an idea that why do we see that okay, Cherrapunji gets maximum rainfall, because when you try to measure rainfall of different locations, you can actually get the values, and those values will be able to tell you which place gets how much rainfall.